For this last video, we're going to go over unsupervised learning and k-means. So, how is unsupervised learning different from supervised learning? If we consider the duck and cat example, the approaches are a bit different, but the gist of it is that in supervised learning, we provide the labels with each of our samples. In unsupervised learning, we don't provide the labels with our samples. That's the main difference. But the approaches are also different too. So in supervised learning, we do classification. So we provide the sample with the label, we provide another sample with a label we're training, and then we test and we say, what's the label? So put this into a class. Well, with unsupervised learning, we will have samples, but we won't provide the labels, and we're not going to say necessarily assign this to a class. We're just going to have you group the samples together. So maybe I would say, here are some pictures. I'll hand you some physical pictures of these ducks and cats. I want you to, well, I won't tell you what they are. What I'll do is I'll get you to group them together. Or in the case of unsupervised learning, one method is clustering. So I get you to put these into clusters. Okay, and you might say, yes, these images aren't the best example for clustering, because what we're going to talk about is just points of data. But you can apply unsupervised learning techniques to images, and there's a lot of different research in that. So these aren't necessarily the most out there examples. It's just that these are sort of different approaches. So in supervised learning, we're classifying, like in your assignment. In unsupervised learning, we're clustering, as one example, like we'll see in k-means. So let's go through k-means, the general idea behind k-means, and we'll code it using sklearn. So this picture is just to show you the sort of steps for k-means. Let's say we have some data points. Okay, and notice again, we're dealing with unsupervised learning because these are unlabeled. Unlabeled samples. These don't have a particular class associated with them. They don't have a particular label associated with them. And remember, when we're talking about classes and labels, we're talking about supervised learning. Whereas here, with unsupervised learning, we just have the samples themselves. What we want to do is we want to cluster these samples, and how we're going to do that is we're going to pick, in this case, we have 3 means, but you could specify however many clusters you want, or how many you think would be appropriate. So in this case, we said 3 clusters, and we've just placed 3 means here. And what we're going to do after plotting it, and the first step is cluster the data. So how we do that is we say, for each point, is it closer to this mean, or this mean, or this mean? Well, for this particular square, it's closer to this red circle, so we say this is part of the red cluster. For this square, it's close to the green circle, so it's part of this green cluster. And we do the same thing for all of these points, and we create 3 clusters. But to make it a bit better, what we want to continue to do is move the mean towards what we call the centroid of the cluster. And the centroid is just basically if you have a given cluster, not including the mean, so all of these squares, if we take a certain cluster of the squares, where is the center of this cluster? Okay, so we're just calculating the center, or the centroid. And for this green cluster, the centroid is, it looks like somewhere here. Okay, somewhere where my mouse is. So we're going to take this mean and we're going to move it down to the centroid. Same thing here with the red cluster. We only have 1 square in our cluster. Remember, this is the mean. So the mean is going to shift to the centroid, and the centroid for a single point is just the point itself. So we're moving the mean to that point. And we do this again and again until we no longer have to move our mean, and then we're done and we have our clusters. So as you can imagine, it's called k-means because we have some number k of means which we are using to create our clusters. So in this case we had 3, but for our data set we have 2 clusters, and we'll get into that when we do our plotting. So let's get into coding this. I've commented out the SVM part of the code, and now what I want to do is I want to apply k-means. So I'm going to say from sklearn import k-means. I'm going to create an instance of this, and in other words, all I'm saying is I'm going to be using k-means. This code will get me there, and this k-means part here is basically saying we want to use k-means, and in the brackets we're going to specify how many means we want. So for our data set, if you remember, we had 2 sort of clusters, 2 classes for supervised learning, or 2 clusters for unsupervised learning. So we'll pick 2. And there's a typo here. I typed k-means. So there are a few ways you can import this. You could say from sklearn import cluster, and then you'd have to type cluster.k-means because k-means is within cluster. Okay, or you could do from sklearn.cluster import k-means. Okay, both ways will work. You're just basically picking how far in you're going. So you might say from sklearn.cluster, let's go into k-means and let's use that. Or you could say from sklearn import cluster, and then from there we're going to use cluster.k-means. Okay, either way works. Now we're going to do our fit. So we just type k-means dot fit, and this is corresponding to this variable here. So we're taking our k-means instance, we're applying the fit method, and even though we have specified this as input train, for the purpose of this video we're just saying we have some unlabeled samples. This isn't really like the training set. Like ideally, if we were doing with this data set, if we were applying unsupervised learning to our data set, we'd use the whole thing. But just to show you a quick example, we'll just use the input train data frame which we made, because it has some number of unlabeled samples, I think 32 or so. That's enough to just basically tell what the 2 clusters will be. So let's just use this input train data, and then we will create our clusters. We'll say predict equals k-means dot predict, again on that same data set. Okay, and why did I choose this? Why did I choose input train? Not because I created input train for k-means, but because I just know that this is a number of samples, 32 samples, and they're unlabeled. Right, so we can go ahead and use that for k-means. So now let's get into actually plotting this. We can say we can create a subfigure or a subplot. And there are many ways to do this, but this is just sort of standard copy-paste code from Matplotlib for creating a 3D plot. And you can just really copy and paste this. The idea is not for you to understand all of the code here, but for you to just be able to follow along and get a 3D plot. But if you do want me to go into these details, I can. Maybe just send me an email and I could do a follow-up video, or respond by email, or whatever you'd like. But for the purpose of this video, I just want to get the plotting in to show you how k-means is clustering the data. So we have a scatter plot. We'll type ax.scatter. And we have our data set, which is our input train. And remember, it's not labeled. And since we want a 3D plot, by the way, why do I want a 3D plot? Because if you remember from our data set, and here we're only taking 32 of these samples, but from our data set we had 3 attributes, right? So for a k-means of 2, we have 2 clusters which we want to create, but we have 3 attributes, so we're going to need to plot in 3 dimensions. When we plotted before in 2 dimensions, that's because we were only looking at the first 2 attributes. So ax.scatter, we want to plot for input train, and we want to plot all of these points in the x, these points in the y, and these points in the z. So how do we access just this column here? We could say input train.iloc. This colon means we want to get all of the rows, and column 0. Okay, so we'll do column 0, column 1, and column 2. And I will just copy and paste that and make it a bit smaller so you can see. Okay, and column 0, column 1, and column 2. And notice that we don't have any class labels here again. First thing I'm going to do, that's a typo. First thing I'm going to do is plot all of the data without k-means doing the clustering. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to color the data based off of k-means. Okay, so first let's plot. Let's run this. Okay, so we see a 3-dimensional plot, and this is corresponding to the training set. But ignore that word training set. We're really just, ideally we'd want to take our whole data set, but we just picked 32 samples, and we are plotting that in 3 dimensions. And what we're doing is we're applying k-means to this to see if we can separate these into 2 clusters. Notice again, we're not using any of this class data. How do we see what k-means did? Well, we typed all this code. How do we actually see it in action? One way is that we can color our plots based off of the k-means results, the k-means prediction results. Okay, so we'll say our color is equal to this, which was k-means prediction. So let's see it now. Let's plot it. Okay, the colors are a bit hard to see, but these points are colored in yellow, corresponding to one cluster, and the other cluster is colored purple. So it looks like k-means did a good job of separating the two. This was a toy example though, so it's a pretty simple one. There are definitely way more complex examples that k-means can tackle. But that's it for today's module. Hopefully you got an idea of supervised learning and unsupervised learning and how they might be different, and hopefully the supervised learning portion helps a bit for your assignment 4. But that's it for now. Hope you all have a great week. Take care.